In today's analysis, we're going to travel back in time to the 11th century to dive into a truly fascinating period of history. Imagine an entire region just plunging into spiritual chaos. Ancient texts and complex teachings are spreading like wildfire, but there is absolutely no order to any of it. Well, that was the reality in Tibet at the time. To fix this profound confusion, the people didn't just need another scholar. They needed an ultimate unifier. They needed someone who could bring structure to what was essentially a spiritual Wild West. And that person was a master known as Atiśa. So let's explore how this one incredible figure brought order to the chaos and became the guiding light of the second transmission of Buddhism into Tibet. But before we really dive into the details, let's just quickly check out our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover a new era of transmission. Second, portrait of the master. Third, lamp for the path. And finally, fourth, legacy of enlightenment. All right, section 1, a new era of transmission. Seeking order in Tibet. So the 10th and 11th centuries marked what's known as the second transmission of Buddhism from India to Tibet, and this was championed largely through the Western Tibetan kingdom. But I have to stress, it was not a smooth or organized process at all. The core problem was that Buddhist scriptures were just filtering into Tibet and being spread completely indiscriminately. There was no syllabus, no curriculum, and literally no overarching order. Practitioners were, understandably, profoundly confused about how to actually apply these texts in real life. The king looked at this and realized, okay, we have a massive problem on our hands. To end this spiritual confusion, he knew he needed a true, undeniable authority. Initially, the kingdom sent out envoys, brave people like the famous translator Rinchen Sengpo, across the treacherous Himalayas to India just to seek out wisdom. But eventually, the king realized that merely importing more texts wasn't going to cut it. They needed to summon a living, breathing master to make sense of the whole shebang. Moving on to Section 2, Portrait of the Master. The Outstanding One. Now, here's something kind of fascinating about the man they summoned. We commonly know him as Atiśa, but that is actually just a title. It translates to the Outstanding One, or the Excellent One. His actual formal name was Dipankara Sri Jnana, and while his formal name definitely points to his deep scholarly roots as an Indian master, that title, Atiśa, the Outstanding One, is what truly stuck in history. And honestly, it perfectly captures his role. He wasn't just another monk passing through. He was a brilliant, unifying intellect who literally stood head and shoulders above his peers. That made him the absolute ideal candidate to solve this spiritual crisis. To really understand his massive historical footprint, let's trace his timeline. He was born in the year 982 in the Pala Empire of Eastern India, which is where he spent decades studying and mastering the teachings. But the critical turning point, the real game changer, is the year 1042. That is when Atiśa finally arrived in Atang, Tibet, officially answering the king's summons. And he didn't just visit to give a few guest lectures. He committed completely. He spent the last 12 years of his life, until his death in 1054 in Yettong, entirely dedicated to this monumental mission. Now, 12 years might not sound like a long time, but the structural reorganization he achieved in that single decade literally changed Tibetan history forever. And if you look at his background, it brilliantly illustrates exactly why he was capable of pulling off such a massive feat. I mean, look at these credentials. Before he even stepped foot in Tibet, Atiśa was already the patriarch of the Magadha lineage. He was a highly respected teacher at the prestigious Vikramasila University, which, at the time, was one of the premier epicenters of learning in all of ancient India. On top of that, he was renowned as a master of developing bodhicitta, the enlightened mind. With this totally unparalleled background, he arrives in Tibet and goes on to found the Kadampa school. So the crucial takeaway here is this. The Tibetan king didn't just get a teacher. He basically got the undisputed master of Buddhist scholarship, perfectly equipped to meticulously reorganize their completely scattered system. Which brings us to Section 3, Lamp for the Path, Structured Enlightenment. This was his specific, practical tool for fixing the spiritual chaos. And I really want you to lean into the metaphor of the title here. Remember the core problem? A massive library of scattered, unorganized scriptures causing widespread confusion? Well, Atiśa's major work, The Lamp for the Path, acted exactly like a bright lamp being carried into a dark, incredibly cluttered room. It illuminated all those scattered scriptures and, most importantly, it established a clear, orderly progression. He literally stopped the indiscriminate spread of texts by giving people a map. He built a strictly ordered path that absolutely any practitioner could use to successfully navigate these really complex teachings. Let's break down how this actually builds because, frankly, this is where his genius truly shines. He broke down the journey into a highly logical three-tier framework. Step 1 is the lower practitioner. This is someone whose primary motivation is simply to achieve a good rebirth. Step 2 is the middle practitioner, someone who is striving deeper for their own personal self-enlightenment. And then we reach step 3, the higher practitioner. This is the bodhisattva, the one who seeks full enlightenment not just for themselves, but for the sake of all sentient beings. By creating these 3 distinct steps, Atiśa brought strict order to the teachings. It wasn't just a confusing mess anymore, it was a highly logical, step-by-step staircase. It allowed anyone to locate exactly where they were and figure out exactly what they needed to study next. And that leads us to Section 4, Legacy of Enlightenment, a Lasting Impact. To truly appreciate his impact, we really have to look at his greatest intellectual feat. Before Atiśa, you had these 2 massive, distinct philosophies regarding the perfection of wisdom, or prajnaparamita. On one hand, you had Nagarjuna's perspective on emptiness, and on the other hand, you had Asanga's focus on the encompassing nature of the enlightened mind. Now, emptiness can seem like a very abstract concept, right? While the enlightened mind is deeply engaged and all about compassion, Atiśa successfully fused these 2 previously distinct philosophies into one unified, cohesive practice. He essentially proved that ultimate reality and practical, everyday compassion are just 2 sides of the exact same coin. But his meticulous work went way beyond just organizing texts and abstract philosophical concepts. It permanently shaped the major traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. For instance, he elevated the female deity Tara to a position of prime importance, completely transforming how practitioners engaged with divinity. He successfully passed his incredibly organized lineage directly down to his key disciple, Dramtan, ensuring that the teachings survived intact. And perhaps most impressively, through the Kadimba school he founded, Atiśa profoundly influenced the later Galupa school, which was established by the great master Tsongkhapa. His work over a millennium ago literally created the bedrock that these major traditions still operate on today. Which brings us to a final thought to wrap up today's explainer. We've seen how Atiśa, the outstanding one, brought brilliant order to absolute spiritual chaos by categorizing the journey into 3 clear, accessible steps. Yes, it's an ancient framework, but it is incredibly relevant even now. So, if Atiśa organized this path to enlightenment over 1,000 years ago, which of those 3 levels are you walking today? Are you focused on the immediate future, maybe your own personal growth, or are you actively striving for the benefit of everyone around you? It's a fascinating framework to apply to our own modern journeys of learning and self-improvement. Thank you so much for joining me as we explored the incredible life and structured brilliance of Atiśa.